This is Defiance Daily Dispatches for the Defiant. I am your host, Miles Taylor. And today we're going to talk about how Donald Trump once again is overextending on a whole range of issues, from the war in Iran, a forever war that he has been goaded into, to the deployments of ICE all around the country, including some very alarming new powers that the Trump administration has invoked to be able to automatically deport people it says are terrorists from the United States. We'll talk about that in a little bit. To Donald Trump's latest actions on voting rights in this country ahead of the midterms. I want to bring in my Defiance.org co-founder, Xander Schultz. Xander, a lot to talk about this Monday, but also each of these stories today has an element of defiance to it. But even ahead of that, you and I have another rapid fire list of defiant stories to go through because this weekend was fruitful. You ready to go through this with me?
I was about to say it's my favorite thing we do, but we're starting to stack a lot of favorites. I don't know. Recency bias. It's my new favorite thing that we do, the rapid fire.
We got a lot of favorites. Okay. A lot of things happened over the past few days in terms of defying Donald Trump. And Xander and I are going to take these every other one. First one, today, a coalition of 12 states won an early victory after a federal judge temporarily paused Paramount Skydance's $110 billion acquisition of Warner Brothers Discovery, the parent network of CNN. The judge found the states made a strong initial showing that the merger could unlawfully reduce competition and set an August 3rd hearing on whether to extend the pause. Xander, Donald Trump has got to be very upset about this one. He really, really wanted his billionaire buddies to take over CNN, and it looks like right now the judge has open ears for reasons that should not happen. Hit me with the second one.
Further on that, Senator Elizabeth Warren and Richard Blumenthal and Representative Melanie Stansberry are demanding answers after finding that between $6.5 million and $21.5 million from legal settlements paid by ABC, Meta, Paramount, and X to Trump's presidential library cannot be fully accounted for in public records. No way. Some sort of grifty activity from these guys. Lawmakers have given the foundation until July 29th to explain the discrepancies.
This one is sketchy as hell. Where did that money go, Xander? Why is Donald Trump taking money for his library and it's disappearing? I'm glad those lawmakers are demanding answers in the next week or so. We'll see what they hear back. All right. The next story in rapid fire defiance. After the Tate brothers were allowed to leave Romania and return to the United States last year amid reported lobbying by Donald Trump's allies, they were arrested in Florida this weekend on a UK extradition request. Andrew and Tristan Tate now face 59 charges in Britain, including rape, sex trafficking, and child exploitation related offenses. Their first court appearance in the proceeding was earlier today. Xander, this just goes to show you the type of company Donald Trump keeps, the types of people he's willing to let off the hook to bring back into the United States of America. And boy, I can't think of a better testament to his character than the fact that he's giving rapists a pass. We will see if he allows that extradition to the UK to go forward.
I'd be alarmed if I found one rapist in my friend circle, let alone dozens. This guy's Mahmoud Khalil has filed a federal lawsuit accusing Trump administration officials and pro-Israel surveillance groups of coordinating to target pro-Palestinian advocates. The suit alleges government officials worked with outside organizations to identify people for retaliation over constitutionally protected speech.
This is an important one, Xander. It's an important one for reasons we're going to talk about later. This administration has been targeting the political opposition under the banner of terrorism, and people are fighting back. They are filing lawsuits. They are saying the First Amendment allows me to express a point of view without being deemed by the administration to be a terrorist. Speaking of lawsuits, an Arizona jury found Isaac Luis Amazar not guilty of assaulting a federal officer after he testified that he rushed in to protect his father during an ICE arrest. The defense argued that Luis Amazar acted as a shield, not an assailant, and jurors acquitted him after just over 2 hours of deliberation. Yet another case where the Trump administration says people who were acting fully within their rights were violent against the Trump officers out there in the field. Those people are fighting those charges in court. We continue to see cases like this, and another act of defiance resulting in a victory. Xander, what's the next one in their rapid fire defiance?
The MacArthur Justice Center and the ACLU have filed a federal Freedom of Information Act lawsuit seeking internal DHS records to determine whether the Trump administration has policies directing agents to threaten, surveil, prosecute, or otherwise retaliate against people who photograph, film, or publish footage of immigration enforcement. The lawsuit follows reports that bystanders, including a Chicago woman, were confronted after recording ICE arrests.
You've seen these stories again and again. People filming ICE walking up to them and saying, we're adding you to the terrorist watch list, or demanding their phones. It's not okay. We're not just going to let those things go to the wayside. Thrilled to hear that the center and the ACLU are fighting back against this, filing these FOIA requests. And finally, Xander, in our rapid fire defiance this Monday evening, perhaps the most embarrassing moment of this weekend was that Donald Trump was loudly booed during the World Cup final before repeating last year's awkward Club World Cup moment by lingering on stage during Spain's trophy celebration after FIFA president Gianni Infantino appeared to try to usher him away. An Australian broadcaster was later caught on a hot mic asking, are they going to edit him out of that? Yeah. That happened.
Yes.
Folks, if you didn't see it. But Xander, my favorite part of this whole episode wasn't even the booze or the hot mic. It was the Guardian's caption under this photo you see right there. The caption of the photo says, quote, Gianni Infantino carefully explains to Donald Trump that he is not part of the Spanish national team. Amen. Amazing. Chef's kiss. No notes. What a great little act of defiance there by the caption editor. Love it.
Just give it a couple months. He's going to ask for their trophy too, right? Given his trend, he's not only going to think he's part of the team, but he himself deserves the trophy hung somewhere in the Oval Office, I imagine.
That's right. Well, friends, before we go into the rest of the show and we talk about our top stories of the day, let me just say, I urge you to go check out defiance.org. You can subscribe to follow our updates on how we are countering Donald Trump's corruption, which we do every single week. You can sign up to become a member if you want to contribute to those efforts to counter Donald Trump's corruption. And please, 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 wherever you are watching, like and share and subscribe. If there's a thumbs up button, hit it. If there's a heart button, hit it. This is the simplest one-click way you can help us spread the defiance to more people. Even if you do that every time you hear me say it, but today you're like, I don't know if I can get my index finger out. Please get your index finger out. If you don't have an index finger, get your thumb out. If you don't have any of those, use some sort of other command device. Please help us spread the defiance in this country. That's not to benefit our social media. That's to benefit the growth of the defiance.org ecosystem to fight back against Donald Trump's corruption. Xander, we're going to jump in and start today with Iran, because over the weekend, folks probably saw that the war that was supposed to end dozens of times before actually hasn't ended. It's gotten a lot worse. The fighting escalated. More American troops were killed in Iranian strikes. And according to new reporting from the Washington Post, at least one U.S. official now says the administration is preparing for what they describe as a wider war. Unfortunately, we're already seeing the human toll. 19-year-old Army specialist Isabella Gonzalez was killed over the weekend, becoming one of the latest American service members to lose her life as the conflict continues to expand. I was very sad to see this over the weekend, Xander, for a couple of reasons. Obviously, for the service members and their families who've lost loved ones. And because I also know that Donald Trump is going to be goaded into expanding this conflict. That is the point. The Iranians clearly know that they are provoking Trump into a wider conflict where they feel like they're going to have the upper hand, where they feel like they are going to be bleeding America, actually, diplomatically, militarily, politically, and Donald Trump is taking the bait. And, I would say we have to do right by those service members, but the answer is not what appears to be America trending towards a ground invasion. But interested in your take on this, but it seems like the president is very much being goaded into a wider conflict.
Honestly, I was thinking about you this weekend when I saw this happen, and I was wondering what your advice would be into. It is easy to see Americans, even though they despise why we got invested in this war, as they see Americans kill, support retaliation, retribution, and lock us into this vicious cycle of conflict. And I just wonder what your advice would be to Americans as we see inevitable reaction from Iranians. Like, what should our advice to Americans be as they see young Americans killed in a completely unnecessary conflict that, as a reminder, started when we killed this country's president or leader, not president, but leader, and hundreds of school children. And so I wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, look, Donald Trump is not going to change trajectory until the incentives change. And right now, he feels like he can act with sort of political impunity. The votes to rein him in Congress have been largely symbolic. He needs Republicans in his own party to say, we are cutting off the funding to the war. That is it, to keep him from continuing the fighting. And he's going to need that pressure. He's going to need pressure from allies. Otherwise, the Iranians are going to keep playing him like a fiddle and getting him into this fighting. There's a reason why they've been painting murals of Donald Trump in a coffin and his family members. There is a reason why they have been releasing these taunting Lego videos that show themselves going after Donald Trump's enemies. They know it gets under his skin. I mean, look, this is the same reason, Xander, that people at the Lincoln Project knew if they mocked Donald Trump on TV, they could get a reaction. Our adversaries know that as well. Most of the time, that is in the form of praise. Oftentimes, our allies praise Donald Trump because they know flattery is the key to getting what they want. In this case, the Iranians know that provoking Donald Trump is the way to get what they want. And here's my worry. This is not just about Iran. Iran is not the only player here. This is not happening in a vacuum. Who are Iran's two superpower patrons? China and Russia. So Iran, in a vacuum, probably would see the extraordinarily generous, absurdly generous deal Donald Trump put on the table. $300 billion in reconstruction funding, normalization of relations to a certain standpoint, and take it. Why aren't they taking it? You have to ask that question. Well, because clearly they have patrons in Moscow and Beijing that are willing to support them if they continue the conflict, because it's beneficial to the Chinese and the Russians if America is bled dry earlier, as I said, militarily, diplomatically, politically, financially. So they feel like they have the advantage here. And until this administration realizes they're not just fighting with the Iranians, I don't think this thing ends. But guess what two countries, Xander, Donald Trump seems totally unwilling to put pressure on anything? Russia and China. Russia and China.
That's where I was going.
Think about it. Just last week, Donald Trump said the Chinese were guilty of hacking the 2020 election. He made these big claims. And in the speech, there wasn't a single act of retaliation against China. Not a single mention of a sanction, of a diplomatic expulsion, because it was never about holding China accountable. It was just about laying the predicate for stealing the midterm election. So this war in Iran will not end until Donald Trump realizes he's gotten himself into a wider regional war with global players participating. If he doesn't do that, we're going to be sucked into this forever war. And by the way, to give people a little bit more detail, that renewed fighting from this weekend, if you weren't tracking, stemmed from the collapse of last month's MOU that I mentioned, the Memorandum of Understanding, where Donald Trump promised hundreds of billions of dollars to the Iranians if they ceased the conflict and reopened the Strait of Hormuz. Now, Iran says that the agreement is effectively dead, with both sides exchanging new strikes, and officials say that the conflict has entered a much more dangerous phase because of this. Now, naturally, Xander, reporters asked Trump about Iran declaring the agreement null and void. His response was this. He said he, quote, couldn't care less. Now, Xander, we've seen this one before, right? Because that's kind of...
Didn't we just say this? Like, what didn't we just report on this like 2 weeks ago? When was that?
I mean, this is always his tell, right? Is he's trying to project confidence while taking all sorts of heat. And I think the frustrating thing for any American watching this is you may hate Donald Trump. You may love Donald Trump. We want our president to succeed in getting us out of this conflict. And it's clear he's one of the worst negotiators on the planet. The guy who said he was the ultimate deal maker cannot make deals happen. They seem to happen despite Donald Trump and not because of him.
Yeah, it's incredible that's what he's known for. That's his book, Art of the Deal. It's like is what he authored. It's incredible watching that author now live try to negotiate important deals and seeing how terribly it falls apart. I wonder who else would be a disappointment. What other famous life
Let's
advice
not give him too much credit. Author,
yeah. Fair enough.
Guy who hired a ghostwriter is what we'll call him. In the future.
Fair enough.
New York Times guy who hired a ghostwriter bestseller. But I want to go back, Sandra, to that Washington Post reporting for a second, because the official who was warning about a wider war, that wasn't followed by any confidence. In fact, they seemed pretty concerned about where this was trending. In fact, one U.S. official told the Post the United States is entering this next phase of the conflict with two major limitations. One, our stockpiles of key weapons, including air defense systems and long-range munitions, are already being stretched thin. And second, there simply are not enough additional troops or military assets readily available to dramatically expand operations if this war continues to grow. In other words, the concern from inside the military isn't just that the war is getting bigger, it's whether America even has the resources to sustain a bigger fight. This is what the Iranians know. This is what the Chinese know. They see reporting like that and they say, we've got America at the ropes. Don't cut it. And I don't know this to be true. I strongly suspect it to be true, that they're whispering into the ear of the Iranian leaders and saying, don't back down now. We've got your backs. Keep this fight going. America's against the ropes. Let's deliver a knockout. Let's drain their supplies. Why? Because the Chinese and the Russians have other incentives in the region. It's been reported that Putin wants to try to go into other NATO countries like Poland. It's obvious that the Chinese want to go take Taiwan. These two superpowers are trying to drain us by keeping us in that fight, something that the Trump administration clearly has blinders on about. And here's, Anders, where things start to get interesting politically, because some of Trump's own supporters are beginning to ask this same question. Matt Von Swall, who's been one of Trump's biggest online defenders, posted this over the weekend, quote, I am confused. The USA is the most powerful military on earth. We've bombed the hell of Iran for 4 months. Trump says their Air Force, Navy, and nearly all of their missile capabilities are destroyed. So how is Iran still capable of hitting U.S. bases right now? Well, Xander, I think it's because they've got a president who's not telling them the truth. What do you think?
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. It's great to see them also coming to those conclusions increasingly. I appreciate it. Lies upon lies are smacking them in the face on a daily basis. That's been nice. I will say, Miles, you mentioned a couple times here Russia and China's influence on not just the war in Iran, also social media. Both of them had large social media operations. Obviously, other info wars and ways that they've attacked us. Our adversaries are banking on us to hate each other and break apart. That's their big bet. That's their hope, right? Donald Trump is an engine for friction amongst us and eventually maybe the dissolution of us. And that doesn't mean you have to, sing kumbaya with everyone in this country, but it's just interesting to note that the last thing people who want to hurt us want to see is us figure out a way to come out of this together. And so it just it reminds me of the importance of the work of leaving MAGA, hearing this supporter, start to become a dissenter. And the other times in our history where a large part of the country was not on the best side of history. And then we came together to kind of paint another more beautiful chapter. And so it's just a good reminder that everyone who wants us injured as a country, wants our people weaker, wants to see us split apart. And so not only do we have to not overcome Trump in this moment, which is so important, but see if we can come out of the other side with a project that includes a lot of us and makes us stronger.
Well, and this is one of the consequences of electing a leader who wants our adversaries to be our friends and sees our friends as our adversaries. We went into this fight without the support of our closest Western allies. We are now in this fight, not just with the Iranians, but quietly with the Russians and the Chinese. But Donald Trump so badly wants to be friends with Russia and China that he's not doing anything to go after them. So here we are. We're stuck in this conflict, friendless, alone, undefended, and taking it from all sides. But Donald Trump doesn't want to throw punches except at the Iranians. So here we are. His supporters should not be surprised that the conflict continues. Yeah, we may have destroyed a lot of Iranian military assets. Where do they keep getting missiles from? Where do they keep getting missile defenses from? Gee, I wonder who produces that military equipment? The Chinese?
Right.
The Russians?
Right.
The Russians that Donald Trump saw himself struck a $600 million air defense deal with the Iranians just before he took office. These are the relationships here. This is who is funding them. If Donald Trump is unwilling to call them out, he's going to be sucked into this forever war indefinitely. So that's the silver lining, if there is one, Xander, is more and more and more. We are seeing MAGA defect over the war in Iran. We saw it happen hugely. You mentioned leaving MAGA, but we've also supported other groups like Independent Veterans of America with the No More Forever Wars campaign. These efforts are having a real impact by getting people to turn. It was still remarkable, even though the votes were symbolic, that we had the House and the Senate vote to try to constrain Donald Trump's authority in the wars in Iran. What they need to do is make that serious by cutting off the money, and forcing Donald Trump to get the hell out of this thing in a way that preserves America's dignity.
Miles, I had an incredible conversation with a New York City venture capitalist today who's organizing other fund managers, $1 billion plus fund managers, to speak out against what Trump's doing because of the argument that the instability is bad for business. So you're seeing, this was a pretty impressive group that they were gathering. You're seeing different cohorts from different unlikely factions in society come together. And this group is talking about what could they do as fund managers, as venture capitalists? How could they one, make the argument to their peers in ways that resonate with them, which we keep learning over and over and over again. That's how you organize the victory. Find leaders that can speak from a peer perspective, and then give them the narrative they need, and then support them in their organizing. So that was the first time I've talked to that specific industry, venture capital, with a meaningful group of organizers that were going after it from this argument of instability. It wasn't about morality. It was, guys, we can't invest confidently in an environment where we're going to experience hyperinflation because Trump's about to take over the Fed, where we're at war. We're constantly at war. We don't know why we're at war. And so it's interesting watching other parts of society get pulled into this defiance. And we welcome you all.
We welcome you all, though it really speaks to this moment that America's allies can't convince Donald Trump not to do stupid things. Certainly Donald Trump's own conscience can't. Republican leaders are too scared. It's taking venture capitalists organizing to potentially get him to do the right thing. Boy, that speaks volumes. Xander, I'm going to go into our second big story of the day, which is a number of sub-stories. We're going to talk about immigration and what's been happening on the immigration front, because Donald Trump is spreading his wings there as well in dangerous ways. And this is something I shared with you and the Defiance team on Saturday, because once it came through on my text messages, alarm bells started ringing. Here's the story. To further Trump's mass deportation agenda, his administration is now trying to use a court that has literally never been used before, ever. This is called the Alien Terrorist Removal Court. And while Congress did create this thing back in 1996, every administration, Republican and Democrat, has kept it on the shelf. The Alien Terrorist Removal Court. The function of this court is largely in that name. It allows the government to deport non-citizens that it believes are terrorists or connected to terrorist organizations. Now, on paper, it looks like a traditional court. And I would say in normal times, there's a reason why Congress put this forward. And one of those, Xander, I'll share with you, is that oftentimes when the U.S. government finds a terrorist in this country, and we talked about this a lot at the Department of Homeland Security, it's very hard to bring them up on terrorism charges. You might know that an Al-Qaeda operative is walking the streets of Indianapolis. Maybe you know he's been sent from Syria to Indianapolis, but you can't bring him up on terror charges until you see him, go buy the bomb material. And you don't want him to get that far down the road. And so you try to arrest him on other charges. Well, the idea behind this court is that it would be easier for administrations to say, we know this is a dangerous operative. We have the evidence, and we can rapidly deport that person rather than waiting for them to conduct a dangerous act. But this is not a normal administration. And as I noted, this is not a normal court. In this court, the government files its case, a federal judge reviews it, and the person facing deportation gets a hearing to challenge the government's claims. But here's where it starts to get different. The government is allowed to rely on classified or sealed evidence, meaning the person facing deportation may never get to fully see or challenge all of the evidence being used against them. So, Xander, when you hear that, it's probably not at all surprising. This court has been controversial from day one inside this administration because a lot of legal scholars don't necessarily trust the Trump administration and have questions about whether a process like this provides enough due process under the U.S. Constitution. But in any event, exploiting those gray areas has kind of become this administration's MO. So maybe it shouldn't surprise us that the first thing this administration was willing to do was to dust this thing off, and that they seem poised to use it in more cases. I'll note, Xander, that in the first term, Stephen Miller wanted to bring this court into existence. And what I would compare it to for people is sort of like the FISA court. If anyone knows anything about this, these are the secret courts that are used to approve wiretap grants for, the U.S. spy community to tap Americans, and to basically, go past the Fourth Amendment. These secret proceedings are what is scary about this, because we're supposed to trust that the Trump administration is bringing legitimate classified information to get people deported. And one of the things I said to the team earlier today is it wouldn't surprise me at all if this administration if it had activated this court last year, had used it to make sure that, Abrego Garcia or some of these other famous cases of unlawful arrests had been deported from the United States. And you might say to yourself, well, Abrego Garcia was charged with being a gang member, not a terrorist. Remember, everyone, if you're listening, this administration has been designating gangs overseas as terrorist organizations, as narco-terrorist organizations. They're doing that for a reason, because if they use that hook, they can go present evidence against someone and say, well, this guy who's here in the United States legally, he associates with gang members. Now let's say that information's classified and get him on a fast track deportation. Even though he's got a steady job, he's not actually in a gang, he's not actually violent, he's got a family and 3 kids. This is a secret way for them to get people deported from the United States. I find that very chilling.
Yeah, you nailed it. You got ahead of me on this one. The term terrorism scares me the most out of everything that you just laid out there, just because it's such a flexible term. And we've seen this administration try to flex it in different directions that suit their agenda. And so I think that's definitely now they're trying to find a procedural way, if they can label you such, to your point, subvert due process. It's not good, friends. I think that's my official analysis. It's not good.
Well, if you're looking for a bellwether about whether this is going to go well or not, it looks like the administration has already started to use this court. Last week, DOJ filed the first case in the court's nearly 30-year history. And there's a ton of ways this could go bad, Xander. But here's one silver lining. When the Justice Department filed that first case to get someone here in this country, presumably deported, claiming that they are an alien terrorist, even that did not go according to plan. According to Politico, the judge reviewing the application kicked it back to the Justice Department, saying the government would benefit from a more, quote, thoughtful application, because she still had questions about whether the facts actually fit the statute governing the removal of so-called alien terrorists. So for now, it feels like the court is holding its own, at least doing its job, not rubber stamping these applications from the administration. But I am not going to breathe a sigh of relief just yet, especially given what I wrote about this morning on Defiance News. And go take a look at that if you haven't had a chance. You can go to defiance.org or defiance.news. We wrote today about how the administration seems poised to also expand its Antifa terrorism designations, which would be another vehicle it tries to use to get people deported from the United States, is saying that they're tied to Antifa even if they're not tied to overseas gangs, and vastly expanding their definition of what is Antifa, because, of course, it has no definition since it's not a real organization with leaders, membership, a headquarters, or a budget.
A made-up organization in the grayest of gray words. That is not good if they can tether those two things together. Miles, if only we had a more thoughtful way to figure out if people were guilty of certain things, like if we had a trial of your peers and there were ways to present evidence and whatnot. I'm happy the judge was like, hey, we actually invented a great process for vetting these things out and figuring out, getting the truth of the situation. So
thank goodness
we should keep using that system.
Yeah.
What?
Well, while DOJ is busy looking, Xander, for new legal ways to deport people, another investigation suggests many of the cases it's already bringing, surprise, are not holding up in court. The New York Times spent months reviewing hundreds of cases where people were charged with assaulting ICE or other federal immigration officers, and they released their findings over the weekend. And that's giving me a tiny bit of hope as well. Take a look.
This home security footage shows the arrest of two women. One of the federal agents yelled out the charge. USC 111. Federal statute 18111 makes it a crime to assault or to forcibly impede a federal officer. Earlier in the day, the women had been protesting the presence of immigration agents, but the government never produced any evidence that these women assaulted or forcibly impeded officers at any point. So the charges were ultimately dropped. Our investigation found that this case is one of more than 550 immigration-related cases that took place in President Trump's second term. Of the cases we looked at, nearly a half were either dismissed or acquitted, which is surprising because the average success rate for the DOJ in criminal cases is more than 90%. What we saw by reviewing these videos is that sometimes it was the officers who were the first to get physical. The video we're watching now shows Quentin Williams, a special education assistant, putting his arms up when federal agents move his way. He ends up getting tackled and charged with 18111. And in many situations, people were able to successfully argue that they were acting in self-defense.
I've got to say, Xander, this fits a pattern that people heuristically know, which is that this administration continues to make bold claims about how protesters, observers, targets of the government's action are violently resisting or attacking officers. These end up in court, and that's the benefit of having a constitution and a court system. The administration has to show proof. And when they roll out that proof, when they roll out those videos, when there's the evidence, it's clear it does not stand up to the original charging. Now, here's the thing. They ruin people's lives by this, by going out there and saying, this person's a terrorist, this person's an attacker. People lose their jobs, people lose their families, people lose their livelihoods, only to then be vindicated in a court. It's good that they don't end up in jail on false charges, but what happens after all of that? The damage that's already been done. Now, this story became public within days of another story, which is that apparently the Justice Department and the FBI decided that the FBI would no longer investigate confrontations with ICE, that those cases, let's say an ICE agent who shoots someone, don't get referred to the FBI for investigation. According to administration officials, those cases would now be sent over to Homeland Security Investigations, HSI, to investigate. In other words, if an ICE agent commits potential misconduct, they get investigated by their own team. There was a reason why the FBI used to take these cases. Now, when it became public, they backpedaled on this. The administration said, oh, no, the FBI is going to continue. But there were internal communications to both FBI and ICE officers that this would happen. So naturally, folks aren't trusting the message outside of this administration. It does sound like they are saying to the FBI, hey, back off on the ICE agents. And if we really do have to investigate something, we'll tell ICE to basically investigate itself. HSI, people should know, was born from ICE. It's a sub-agency of ICE. And so, a lot of confidence there in how those investigations are going to go, Xander. So to put it plainly, as the New York Times did, putting the change into practice would make it far less likely that shootings of unarmed people by ICE agents would be investigated to determine if the agents broke federal law. This is exactly one of those reasons we keep talking about the organization that we helped incubate and launch, Fight Against Federal Overreach. We have to have local prosecutors and state law enforcement involved if the federal government is not going to police its own.
Yeah. These are like two, coming from justice reform, these are two very famous happenings in general. There's the phrase, we've investigated ourselves and found no wrongdoing. It happens constantly in local policing. And then the other thing we talked about at the top is called officer created jeopardy. So it's when police escalate a situation and then human beings do normative things to defend themselves, not striking the officers as you saw in the video, put your hands up, blocking yourself, whatever. And then the officer claims that they've been assaulted in some way, which then escalates the charges more. And to your point about ruining lives, 100%, a lot of these people, depending on the situation, can't even afford to defend themselves, right? Like they didn't sign up to get in some big legal battle, and public defense isn't great in this country, so it can be really challenging. But these are two of the worst practices in policing for some time, gone federal with a much bigger budget and a much more despotic leader.
Well, and like I said before, the process is the punishment, right? The administration's getting their butts kicked in the court on this front. That's why that New York Times report was fantastic and encouraging, right? Let me go back to that loss rate. The Times found the administration's losing half of these cases, when historically, when the Justice Department takes a case like this to court, it wins more than 90% of the time. It's losing half. They know they're bringing junk cases, but they also know the process leading up to being in court is what's wrecking people's lives. So we still have to do something about that. I am encouraged, though. So many of the groups that we have supported, backed, and funded are on the front lines fighting this, defending people in cases, and making sure that the administration does not meet a lack of opposition, does not go after people who can't defend themselves, to make sure that people do have that defense if they need it.
Miles, can I make one final point before we move on? I know we got to go here, but it's a good, this point about conviction rates. It is important to understand that oftentimes that happens because someone is able to either bail themselves out or get counsel. And it's a good CTA for all of us, people watching this, to be out there protecting our neighbors, because oftentimes that conviction rate takes place because of a plea deal, because someone doesn't have the resources to defend themselves. I imagine the lower conviction rate has somewhat to do with privileged people in this country have stepped up and are defending their neighbors and are protesting and are creating a force field of sorts for their targeted neighbors. And so it's just a good reminder to get out there. If you're someone who can take risks in ways other members of society can't, to get out there and protect your neighbors.
And one of those simple ways is documenting the interactions that you are seeing. And it just, this would have sounded so strange to our American years 2 years ago that we would say, hey, if you see ICE, film them. You'd say, why? Why would I film them? Well, because a lot of these cases, we're talking hundreds of cases, people have ended up not being falsely prosecuted by the government because there was video evidence. There was video evidence. Someone somewhere filmed something to show the story did not play out the way the government said it did. Terrifying that that's happening in this country. Encouraging, though, that people are taking that message to heart. Ordinary folks are seeing it and saying, I don't know, maybe if I film for the next 2 or 3 minutes as I'm passing this checkpoint, as I'm witnessing this protest, I might capture something important that could change someone's life. Speaking of life-changing efforts, voting in this country. The administration is trying to go after voting. The administration is trying to change one of your most fundamental democratic rights. And we saw that last Thursday when Trump gave what he billed as a major speech on election integrity. We saw what appeared to be an effort to lay the predicate to exert influence on the midterm elections. In fact, we spent a lot of time on Friday breaking down why Donald Trump's own declassified documents did not support many of the claims he was making about the insecurity of our elections. In fact, they did the opposite. His address proved why our elections are more secure than they've ever been. It proved why Americans and the states should retain their right to vote and the federal government should not be in charge. And it proved that the biggest meddlers in the 2020 election were the Russians and Donald Trump himself. But one thing I want to spend more time on today is something we circle around to a lot in our defense work in the Defiance realm. What's Trump's real plan here? What are all the possible outcomes? Are we thinking ahead to different things we might need to undertake to safeguard our elections? Why keep relitigating an election from 6 years ago? Is this really about 2020? Or is this about setting the stage for 2026? Our next guest thinks what Donald Trump is doing has to do with the latter. David Walbert has spent more than 4 decades litigating voting rights cases, including several before the U.S. Supreme Court, and recently wrote an article for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution that surfaced a potential pitfall in the 2026 midterms that I think we need to take seriously. David, welcome to Defiance Daily. It's great to have you with us.
Miles, nice to be here. Thank you.
And thanks for waiting on us, my friend. Earlier this month, you wrote that article in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution asking a question I don't think many people are asking. You asked, why does the FBI really want the Fulton County election records? Most people assume that this is about reopening 2020. Donald Trump had said, we're going to find out who the rightful winner was of 2020. Certainly, he's got a chip on his shoulder about that. But you argue that it's much more sinister, that this is about 2026. Walk us through that argument.
All right. Well, I wrote a book that is coming out in September 3rd, Stealing Election American Style. And in the course of doing that, a lot of things came to my attention, but one of very good. The last chapter in that book is called The Next Stolen Election. And this is something I wrote, I finished that at the end of last year. And one of the parts of that is to say, well, why is it that Donald Trump and the Department of Justice want all these records? Not just Fulton County, but why are they trying to get all the state's records? I go through about 5 or 6 different reasons. Knowing how the administration operates, that they're going to be used as a basis for some kind of fabricated, evidence and claims and so on. That's, that is a fact. So it is because all this stuff has been studied so closely, they're going to use it to falsely say that non-citizens are voting all over the place, even though we know from hundreds of studies that that's utterly false. But one of the things, and then they'll use it ultimately for challenging elections, generally speaking. But the one that really comes down to the most problematic one is this. When I did the chapter on Stop the Steal, on Trump's effort to steal the election in 2020, one of the things that really jumped out at me and was just the details of how he went about trying to convert Congress into, which Congress has a responsibility to look at the electoral votes, but how he tried to get the true vote count from the states disregarded by Congress, have them, quote, investigate the 6 swing states, ours being one of them, Georgia, Arizona, and so on. And then based on the, quote, evidence that they were going to see, change the electoral votes of those states, reassign them. And it's very obvious. There's no question that he did that. I don't think there's any dispute about it. The people around him testified to it. And one of the statements of the testimony in the special committee's report I found real interesting was Trump tried to get the Department of Justice at one point to file a completely bogus lawsuit against Pennsylvania. This is really late in the process. And then acting Attorney General Jeffrey Rosen says, well, there's no basis for doing that. I can't do it. And he said, don't worry about that. Just file it and let me and the Republican congressman take care of the rest. So the deal is, and Trump sees elections that way. He doesn't see them as who gets the most votes. He sees who captures it at the end of the day. And that's not just adding up the votes in his mind. Well, the problem we have for the midterms, people think, well, that was the Electoral College, and that was that, and that was 2020, and it didn't work. But the problem is, most people aren't aware of exactly how congressional elections work. And there's a provision in Article 1 that says that the House and the Senate are the judges of the elections and returns of their members. And what that means is that no matter what a state secretary of state might say, or an election board, or a court, might say about who won a congressional race or who won a Senate race. Here in Georgia, we got a close one, of course, the John Ossoff. And no matter what the state might say about that, if the Congress says otherwise, that's who wins. And the court can't do anything about that. It's how the Constitution assigns that authority. Now, people, well, is that really likely to happen? Well, interestingly enough, there's been hundreds of election contests in Congress in our country's history. Most of them have been, insignificant. You wouldn't know anything about them. A couple of them you might have heard about, but overall, most of them go away. Some of them have been pretty significant, but a small minority. But you don't know about that historically. But when you take that legal fact, that constitutional provision, and you look at it in the framework of what Trump did in 2020, that gets very, very dangerous because he could do the same thing. It's just the same playbook of 2020. And I'll give you a couple of scenarios. One, first of all, he's, to your point about what did he do on July 16th? He is doing everything possible to create exactly like he did in 2020. Elections are not reliable. They are dangerous. They are unreliable. They are riddled with fraud and so on. That is what he did in 2020 to set up the grounds for claiming that the election had been stolen from him. Totally false, but he had enough people believing it that It made a big deal. And he then took those lies, and in Georgia here, for example, there were a lot of Republicans in the General Assembly who were willing to falsify the electoral vote count on his behalf. There are a lot of people in Congress that are willing to vote, that Arizona's electoral votes, Georgia's and so on, didn't go the way the state said. They're going to have a little pseudo investigation and decide that it actually went the other way. It's an interesting question that we'll never know the answer to, but it's about 2020. Had Trump not pulled off the January 6th insurrection, I wonder what the vote by the Republicans in Congress would have been on that issue. Now, even with January 6th, where Republican congressmen, all the people in Congress were like shaken, terrified, and so on, he lost a lot of votes on his scheme. A lot of people who would have voted for him. You remember that a lot of people were talking about impeachment the next day and that same day. Now that changed quick, but on that very day, I'd like to know, it would be interesting to ask how many people would have voted this scheme that did not vote in the end of the day. But still, I can't remember the exact number, but like 150 Republicans in Congress already still, even after January 6th, still voted to do it to Arizona. So
we can't assume just because the truth is the election wasn't stolen that these guys won't go along with it. They've been complicit in so many things.
Absolutely.
I'm so grateful to be speaking to you today. I was talking to one of my favorite pro-democracy strategists earlier today, and he's saying we're chock full of win the midterm strategies. We have some stop the steal strategies, but maybe not enough what to do mid-steal or what to do after it's been stolen strategies out there. As you're looking into this scenario, where Congress votes on this and maybe it's a little shaky, where their loyalties lie and what they end up doing. What are the interventions? I think about inoculation a lot. How do we inoculate against this scenario?
Well, I think the most important thing is understanding the danger, which is not really out there very much. Like, what is the ultimate danger that could be done here? Because there's two ways I can see it playing out from Trump's point of view. And one is if the election goes against him, and he doesn't have to pick a whole lot of seats, of course, to try and keep a majority. He can just go in and challenge a certain number, have those candidates do it. An election contest is the easiest pie to start. It's like filing a lawsuit.
Right.
The difference that people need to understand is an election contest, unlike he lost 62 lawsuits over the 2020 election. Because you go to court, you actually have to have facts. You have to have proof. You have to sustain cross-examination. And BS doesn't fly. I've said many years as a trial lawyer, and I said that the best weapon we have as lawyers is cross-examination. And the amount of BS I've seen evaporate in a courtroom is fantastic. It happens all the time.
Fertilize a very big farm.
So picture a trial before a committee in the House or the Senate, which is a majority Republican. And instead of what we're talking about in terms of evidence and cross-examination, it's going to be the kind of stuff that they were bandying about on the internet back in 2020. You know, oh, these people were passing around drugs and so on and counting hundreds of ballots and counting the same ballots 100 times over in Fulton County. That kind of utter nonsense. It never happened, but, you know, they start saying it and some people believe it. Well, that kind of stuff, nonsense, would be admissible because there's no rules of evidence in a congressional hearing, and it boils down to political power. The truth of who won will not be determined by the facts. It'll be determined by the political power in the Congress. And I think the thing that's so important about this is getting the word out, if you will, Xander, and having people understand this is the best defense, to be inoculated for it. Because the very worst scenario is a little bit even worse than I just described. Trump, as you know, regrets not having called out the National Guard to seize election equipment in 2020 to continue his false allegations about the election being stolen and to help Congress come up with his scheme to switch the electoral votes around. Well, the worst scenario, because he's capable of doing this, and he's now got the administration that will do it for him. Unlike the Attorney General and so on, the people that said no in 2020, they're gone. What if it starts going bad on election day, and Trump then orders whoever, the FBI or the National Guard, whoever, he doesn't have the power over that, but the Department of Homeland Security, ICE, whoever, in the selected precincts, go and get that equipment, get those ballots. Now, what you've done if you do that, if they get away with that, and I think that's well within his wheelhouse of corruption that he's entirely capable of doing. If that happens, the states can't determine who won because the stuff is gone. If you take out, like in Fulton County here, which is, it's the biggest county by votes in the state, you went to like a half a dozen big precincts that are heavily Democratic, Secretary of State's not going to be able to say who won that, with those votes being taken by the FBI. Now that, and I hate to say I'm giving advice to these guys, but they're
already thinking of all these stupid things. They've already got this in their minds. I mean, but that goes to some of the remedies because, it's not like we just have to sit on our hands. I mean, a lot of state election officials, states attorneys general, local prosecutors, thankfully, because of people like you, are imagining these possibilities and saying, if they try to seize my ballots, if they say they've got a warrant from a magistrate judge, here's how I'm going to escalate in the courts. Here's how I'm going to file an emergency appeal. I'm going to chain those ballots to the wall. I'm going to go send authorities to guard them. And I'm going to say, we're going to get this settled in the courts. And, it's not a situation you want any state or local officials to be in, but it's what they have to do to defend our democracy is be prepared to wage legal warfare against the lawless use of presidential power to seize ballots in the election. I mean, everyone who's listening, everyone, MAGA, anti-MAGA, pro-Trump, anti-Trump, knows that this guy is just gearing up to try to steal an election. It's what he's trying to do. He's laying all the tools out there. He's being very, very brazen about it. And there's no evidence in any of these battlegrounds that there's fraud. When I was at the Department of Homeland Security in the first Trump administration, they asked us to do a systematic nationwide review on whether, illegal aliens voting had tilted elections. We found like a couple dozen cases, like nothing to tilt an election, right? It was insignificant. And so there's no real fraud here. There wasn't in 2020. There isn't now. And so that's why states have got to be prepared for this. I also want to ask you about turnout, because it occurs to me that when you look at instances where autocrats try to steal elections, one of the best inoculative aspects is to make sure the population doesn't think it's possible that their claims are true. In other words, that the population is so convinced that the political opposition won that as soon as the administration tries to make the case, well, this was stolen, this race is questionable, this one, people know in their bones it's not true because they saw the lines, they saw the turnout, they know it's not real, and that galvanizes them to action and ratchets up the pressure rather than the administration exploiting the benefit of the doubt that people often give the government. I want to get your take on that and how people power can be used in the midterm elections to guard against these schemes.
You're 100% right. I think it's used two ways. That way, for sure. You've got to proselytize, if you will. You've got to educate. You've got to talk about it. You have to have people understanding the danger. And, the most precious thing we have in this country is the right to vote. That is the right that any political scientist, historian, or constitutional lawyer says that is the right that is preservative of all others. And it is, people have died for it, people fight for it. And to have people understand the importance of casting that ballot and voting. And I think the other side of that is to understand what they would do to it if they can. If they lose at the ballot box, they will try and steal it, and here's how. And I think that's important because people have to understand that danger. If they understand that danger, the possibilities of doing it after the election are that much less. I think, for example, you're absolutely right about the courts being prepared and litigators being prepared if there's an effort to snatch election equipment at the time of or immediately after the election. Courts can't overturn the decision of Congress, but they darn sure have the power to stop the administrative agencies and the executive from interfering with the state election count. No question about that. What the today's Supreme Court would do with that, jury's out on that one. But lower courts absolutely have the power to enjoin that kind of interference with an election. Actually, the DOJ handbook specifically has a couple pages on this issue and says this is something you don't do. You don't ever, even if you have good evidence of election fraud, you don't go in and do a search or take anything until the state is 100% done with counts, recounts, and litigation, if so, because it so undercuts the credibility of elections. Now, granted, that's in the handbook, the manual for the Department of Justice and the U.S. attorneys. Are they going to follow it under Trump? Another question. But it is, I do think if people understand it and it is so pervasively understood the potential of stealing the election this fashion, I think that as long as the count goes forward in the states, as long as the FBI, as long as there isn't a seizure of the ballots and the equipment right around the time of the election, before the states finish their count, if enough people understand this and are pointing at it and calling it out in advance, that power, that people power, if you will, I think that stops him.
Well, David, we're going to hope that we see that, my friend. We're going to hope we see that in November, but I suspect we're going to have more opportunities to bring you onto this program to sound the alarm for folks, to make sure they hear it, to make sure they feel animated to go out there and protect their democracy. And also, if they are feeling animated, they can pre-order Dave's book, Stealing Elections, American Style. You can get that book on bloomsbury.com or wherever fine books are sold. Dave, really appreciate your expertise, good sir, and we hope to have you back soon.
I enjoyed it. Thank you, Miles. Thank you, Xander.
Thank you.
Appreciate you. Xander, we go now to our final segment of the day and every day, which is who is joining the Defiance in this country. Sometimes we have very serious stories of people joining the Defiance, fighting back against abuses of power. Sometimes fun and clever ones like this. And to finish up today's episode and kick off your weekday on a high note, let's see who we are welcoming. Today, we meet Thomas D. Mangelson, an American nature and wildlife photographer and conservationist who, after seeing Donald Trump's new design for the national park passes this past January, that design that's got his face on it. I know it's George Washington and Donald Trump. Welcome to the parks. Has Donald Trump ever gone to a national park? Anyway, I'm not going to go down that road. So Thomas decided to do something clever. He decided to use his love of nature and art to create something that restores the beauty back in our national parks. I want you to take a look.
Tom Mangelson. A few weeks ago, when I learned that Donald Trump is going to be on park passes, I realized that I had to do something. So I created these park pass sleeves that you can put your park pass in with wildlife and actually landscapes of our national parks and public lands and cover up Donald Trump's face. I think it's important that we celebrate national parks and not our current president. Our park passes are for the environment, for public spaces, wildlife, national parks, and not for politicians. A portion of the proceeds will go to conservation. Find the park pass sleeves in my shop. Thank you very much.
Country roads take me home.
Yes.
I belong.
West Virginia.
Take it.
Come on, Xander.
There you go.
Mama. Those are very cool. If you didn't notice, or if you're just listening on audio only, the park pass sleeves just cover up the half that has Donald Trump's face on them with like bears and, eagles. And those are fantastic. So I think we can pull this up. His TikTok, if you're on TikTok, his TikTok shop, Thomas D. Mangelson, has these sleeves, or we can drop it into the chat for folks if they want to see. Very cool that he's doing these. And if I had re-upped my park pass, I would literally right now live buy one of those. There it is in his TikTok shop. There's some great ones. Get that for your park pass. Love that. Cover up Donald Trump's face. Fantastic.
I think that guy would be kind of nice on the national. He was kind of like the national park version of like the KFC Colonel. He had like a little bit of that energy and look going. I'd like him on the national card. Maybe he could be next up
on the program.
Yeah, let's bring him.
Can
very
you
soothing voice too.
You slide into his DMs?
Yeah.
Get him. All right, rock and roll. He'd be like, what does that mean to slide into my DMs? Let's have him on the program. I would love to have him talk about this. So, for keeping political corruption out of our national parks, we would like to welcome Tom Mangelson to the Defiance in this country. Tom, we hope you're on the program soon. We hope you check your messages. We're going to invite you onto the show. We've gone a little bit into overtime today, folks. Maybe if we have one or two questions in the chat, defiance.org members can ask questions in the chat. Xander, I don't know if you have the chat open. I don't presently have
it
open.
Yeah, I got the chat going. I always got the chat. If you look, if you see me constantly distracted over here, that's just our people. I'm not wandering off mid-show. I'm just hanging out in the chat. I want to say one thing though. I'm going to preempt some questions that came up because that was a pretty scary conversation with our guests today.
But we went right into park passes to make people feel better.
Yeah, we jumped in. But I'm jumping back to the scary conversation.
You might
just
steal your election, but you can buy a sleeve to cover up his face in your park.
It was a sudden pivot. I wasn't quite ready in the jovial mood.
All right,
but look, I'll say this. If you're wondering what can we do, we've been doing a lot of it already. Dick Gephardt's organization, Keep Our Republic, is advising those very same state and local officials on what they can do to reject claims of emergency powers. So if you remember a few months ago, we invested in Keep Our Republic to brief local and state officials on what to do. We have FAFO, which is prosecuting ICE agents and getting rid of the idea that they are immune somehow and that they can just be the boots on the ground of fascism without paying any sort of price. We're starting to prosecute those individuals. They're also starting to focus on election security. We've asked people to join their indivisible local chapters. So you can do things like guard the polls, poll watch, support your targeted community members so they feel safe going to the polls. So if you haven't done that already, join your local indivisible group. We have stuff on the horizon. We're working on supporting a group that's working on passing mask laws and identification laws for ICE agents and other federal agents so they're easier to identify. There's a project that we've been supporting that I don't know if it'll ever be one of these because I don't know how public it can be, but it's helping right-wing influencers get out the truth about the election. So when Trump lies, they're met with the truth 10 times. Just today, as I mentioned, I was talking to that Democratic pro-democracy, I should say, strategist. We were talking about red teaming the steal, going through just these scenarios with organizers and leading organizations across the country. I already talked to our friends at Committee for the First Amendment, who are behind blocking that merger, by the way, that we covered earlier, about the need to get all of these organizers together so we can go through these scenarios and know exactly what we're doing, not vaguely what we're doing. So just know that we are on the case. We're on the case in a bunch of ways. And most importantly, the most important thing you can do when fighting fascism is stay organized and stay informed, which is what we're doing right here. So you're already doing it. As things change, as things shift, we're going to get the word out about the next best thing we can do so we can organize, respond, and win in this moment. So I just wanted to go through that because it was scary, but we are doing all of the things you need to do to fight back. And we're going to continue to adapt and learn from the moment and do more.
We, not me and Xander, all of y'all, and those of you who are crowdfunding the Defiance in this country, you're the ones that are making this possible. The only thing I would quibble with is Xander's list was incomplete. He's
always quibbling, though. He's such a quibbler.
Oh, so much.
The quibbler.
Defiance Daily, the quibble show. You missed several things that we're supporting, which is great news. You mentioned the local prosecutors that we're supporting in fighting back against this. You mentioned some of the great groups, but we have funded and supported get out the vote efforts involving young people, get out the vote efforts in the battleground states, efforts to sue the administration in the court that have resulted in things like Trump's mail-in ballot executive order getting paused by a federal judge. We've supported groups that defend whistleblowers who, in Dave's scenario that he just sketched out, could be a critical piece of this whole equation. If the Justice Department, if the FBI are engaged in lawless seizures of ballots, this is where we would expect the people who work in U.S. attorneys' offices, the agents at the FBI to say, I'm not doing this. We don't have evidence of fraud. I just got a phone call from the White House. Stephen Miller wants me to go take these ballots in this state. We're not going to do it. That's not how this works. We're going to depend on those whistleblowers coming out because their disclosures will make it harder and harder for Congress to do the things Dave warned about. If the Republican majority tries to refuse to seat elected members of the political opposition, tries to drag out the process to prevent the peaceful transfer of power, we're going to count on those people on the inside to sound the alarm. As much as you may think Donald Trump becoming president means he's taken over the entire executive branch, let me tell you something. He's taken over 1% of the executive branch. He's trying mightily to fire people and silence them, but they only run the tippy top of each of these areas. Again, they've tried to purge people. They're aggressively trying to recruit MAGA folks into these jobs, into the civil service. But by and large, your government is run by career officials. These guys cannot do it by themselves. And so we're going to be out there doing additional things going into this fall to protect those whistleblowers who can sound the alarm and those groups. For instance, you all at defiance.org were catalytic. You were crucial in helping to fund the launch of Justice Connections program for defending FBI whistleblowers. These are the types of people we're going to be counting on to sound the alarm. Anyway, Xander, that was even an incomplete list. I think we said this on last week's program. We've done so many things on making the elections too big to rig and election protection that we should write those down and track those somewhere. But a lot of efforts underway, and that's because defiance.org members want that to be our primary focus going into the balance of the year, to say nothing of the fact that next week we will have a special announcement on a truck that will be making the rounds to the battleground states in the midterms. If you want a sneak preview of what I am talking about, well, then I hope you are signed up at least for free updates from defiance.org, because tomorrow morning in your inbox, you will get news that you will not get anywhere else about a journey that's going to begin in Washington, D.C. ahead of the midterms, which will ruffle Donald Trump's feathers, to say the least, and which will keep a light on his corruption. So stay tuned for that news in your inbox tomorrow morning, friends. Xander, we are definitely in overtime, but let's take these two very quickly. We've got Brooklyn Paul asking, since the FBI will no longer investigate ICE, can local or state police do it? Brooklyn Paul, not only can they are. In a lot of different places, we are seeing local investigators and prosecutors get involved in these cases, especially where there are violations of state law. And we are seeing some of those prosecutions brought. Most notably, you are seeing that in Minneapolis, where Mary Moriarty had a zillion instances of ICE corruption happen in her.
That was the official number. 1 zillion.
A zillion, yeah, 1 zillion acts of criminal conduct committed by ICE. She is the local prosecutor there. She has brought cases, but we're also seeing that in Texas and other places where prosecutors are taking on these cases against ICE if the FBI is not. So yeah, there is a template here. And, we talk about this a lot, but that's what Xander mentioned earlier. The fight against federal overreach, this organization FAFO that we helped incubate, is out there doing that. And I think that's going to be a continuing theme for the balance of the Trump administration. I suspect, Xander, we are going to continue to fund organizations and help stand up new organizations to get state and local authorities to stand up against the federal government, to help them do that, to train them on how to do that lawfully. And there are a number of other areas where states are starting to collaborate because they're realizing there's no longer an honest broker in the executive branch of the federal government. Second question, Xander, is from Jody Tatum. Question, a bit of a hypothetical. If Donald J. Trump were to no longer be in power, do you think that his influence would pop like a bubble? Or do you think there's enough influence there strong enough for his MAGA movement to continue? I added to your sentence there, Jody. Xander, what do you think? Donald Trump disappears today. MAGA movement, does it continue strong? Does it fizzle?
Well, we've seen him be unable to pass the torch in any meaningful way. He's endorsed a lot of people who have lost. He was able to build a populist movement behind him that's even popping now under him. Forget with other folks. He's losing a lot of that populist energy that he had captured not long ago. But yeah, he is not one of the telltale signs on great leaders is they're able to build leaders up under them. and you've seen the inverse with Trump. He has not developed anyone into being a leader. They're all supporters of him that he consistently throws under the bus or leaves in the dark. And so that does not leave them in a great position. I'm actually more concerned with if the kind of normative political parties, specifically the Democrats, are at least able to learn from the frustrations that fueled Trump's rise and start addressing them in meaningful ways and speaking to their problems effectively. I think I'm the fear of kind of violent populism increases when lots of large sects of the population are not having their problems addressed. And so I would have loved to see the Democratic Party be more aggressive in validating some of the real issues lots of people across this country are facing and taking them on. So I think that's the bigger danger than Trump anointing a number two. I don't think JD Vance has the juice, and anyone who gets close to Trump gets thrown under the bus. Miles, how about you?
This is what happens with cults of personality. The personality dies. No one can step into those shoes. And so, yeah, I would largely agree with you, Xander. And if you want to look for numbers on that, Republicans are very frustrated. Donald Trump's political action committee that's raised hundreds of millions of dollars and should be cultivating his successors and funding a movement. It's holding on to its money. And we reported on that last week. Is Republicans are furious that isn't spending on them because he's not trying to cultivate successors. He is in this for himself. And so I do think that means the movement, at least in its current iteration, fizzles. What unfortunately does not fizzle is this anti-democratic posture that the Republican Party has taken on. It has institutionalized some of these positions about stealing elections, about going after the political opposition. I think some of those things are going to take a generation to undo, but I do believe there will be the momentum to undo them. One quick bonus. Sunil asked the question, aren't there paper ballot backups if they seize voting machines? The answer to that is yes. It's one of the reasons why Donald Trump was wrong last week when he tried to portray electronic voting machines as dangerous to our democracy. Is while no system is 100% foolproof, most of the electronic voting machines in this country produce a backup paper ballot that records your vote. You ever go vote and they give you a little receipt? They give you the little piece of paper. That receipt shows that you voted and how you voted. Well, another piece comes out the back end to make sure that there is redundancy. So try as he might, Donald Trump is going to find what the Russians found in 2016, which is that American elections are very hard to hack. Anyway, that's all we've got for our program today, folks. Be sure to join us tomorrow on Tuesday, regular time, 5 p.m. Eastern, and especially join us on Wednesday when we do our weekly mission brief. And this week is going to be about something else you can do to protect your democracy against Trump's abuses of power, and that is to help us expand the defiance in this country. All this Wednesday, because our Defiance.org members have demanded it. Our members, who we call the Defiance, We're going to talk all Wednesday about how to grow the movement, how we can have strength in numbers, and how that contagious, courageous attitude is going to protect not just our midterms, but our democracy beyond this window. So tune in 5 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday for that. In the meantime, Xander, as we always say, friends, stay loud, stay brave, and stay together. We'll see you tomorrow.